Thank you so very much for joining the session for the CSA AI Summit for Q1 2024. I hope you had a great new year. We will be talking about how to actually think about securing data alongside with AI, because AI has a ton to do with data itself. And we'll also bring a bit of the perspective that Gartner calls TRiSM and what aspects of TRiSM are applicable here. My name is Rehan Jalil. I'm the CEO for Security AI, which is primarily focused on enabling the safe use of data in AI. So why are we here? Of course, as we know, this is one in a lifetime kind of a transformation of the industry, which everyone is expecting that AI is going to enable the transformation, because everything runs on data. And if machines and AI can understand structured, unstructured data and create new value, this is a whole new paradigm of doing the way we do things, the way we build things, the way we understand intelligence. So no question that this is one of the biggest transformations. And there is a huge driver in almost in every company driven by the boards and the CEOs and the CISOs of the companies. However, as we know, that alongside with AI, it brings alongside its risks. And on one side, there is a huge desire to use the AI and generative AI, but the issues that comes alongside with it, they need to be addressed. And for that, there was a poll done by the Gartner, and this is the results. Number one thing, with what 42% of the respondents that responded was all about how my data is going to be used for training purposes, how my data is going to be used for generative and inference purposes. Is it going to be safe? It's all about the safety of the AI, of the data itself, which have protection of data, privacy of data, and so forth. Number two was that hallucination. And why? Because if the AI becomes the oracle, if AI becomes what's going to provide you the answers, then would it give the answers that you really would want to actually have? And that's something that that is certainly a fundamental concern. And similarly, on the security, is the systems that are being created, the models that are being used, and the systems around the data model that are being used, are they safe? Are they secure? And would the answer that are coming out, would it have fairness and bias, and would have no bias around it? So these are fundamental things that I'm sure most of the organizations kind of looking at. So now, we're clearly seeing new issues coming up. Every day there is some news of either AI, generative AI getting used, which was not authorized, or some other data ending up there, or data leaking. And then there are tons of issues coming out from the hallucination side of things, right? So how can these cybersecurity professionals, privacy professionals, compliance professionals become almost like a partner to the business owners to not just block it, to not just simply shut things down because it has a huge benefit and drivers, but become enablers? And we're going to talk a bit about how we can become enablers for the business to actually use the generative AI. Pretty much like any new technology that comes through, it has a groundswell. As much as there's organizations want structure and methodical way of adopting these awesome new tools and technologies, there's going to be a groundswell. Developers will be using whatever models are available. There's tons of open source coming out. Every day there's new models that are coming out, which have good reasons to be checked out. So in organizations, we're clearly seeing in customers a proliferation of not just using some publicly available API or ChatGPT, but experimentation with tons of models that are there. Understanding at any given time what models exist in the organization, that's a question mark. And these are not just the models that are natively being used by the developers, but it could be used by your vendors. It could be used by your SaaS providers and so forth. And alongside with the models, how do you know what risk exists? Is this model a good one to use or not a good one to use? Is there a standard way of assessing the risk? And if the model is there, what kind of security constructs I need in my own environment? What constructs I need to secure these models. These models have a lot of compressed information sitting in there. Models are not much more than is very similar to a data system. The only difference I would say is that it has a lot of compressed information sitting, and the output is unpredictable in some fashion, but it is being trained with some ton of valuable information that is sitting inside these models. So what security controls can go and be inside these models or around these models. And then clearly the question comes out that what data is flowing to these models? And should it be allowed? Should it not be allowed? But first, the visibility of data, that what's going to what models and what type of data and whether it's something sensitive or not. That visibility itself is a question mark at this stage. And then visibility on what data is being generated by the models and what purpose is being used for, whether it's ending up in a Slack channel, whether it's ending up as an agent, whether it's ending up on your website as part of a chatbot, whether it's ending up in through an API in an app. That's a question mark. Like, and how do you create a bit of an inventory around it to know at any given time that you know what kind of data is being taken out? Now, these agents, these automation layers, these maybe Slack channels, these APIs, they become primary paths to the data also, because just like humans can ask questions, or legitimately they can ask questions, there could be misuse of the data. There would be no question that this is attracting new kinds of attacks on the AI systems through these the prompts. And then regulation. As we saw, even in North America, there was a Biden executive order on the governance of AI. EU Act already is through the passing, and there is a ton of new regulations around AI that are coming through. So if you would want to be complying for these regulations, the visibility, and of course, it will also require that what kind of controls you're actually putting around it. But these are generally the questions that are being asked and that or need to be asked and need to be, have a solution to be put in place. Just to simplify it, this is the components of the AI TRiSM, not the entire TRiSM, but these are the 5 steps. The very first thing, at any given time to discover the models, whether it's inside or outside your own development environments. And then having a standard way to document the risk. There's some risks that you can actually just get from the industry itself and some from your own lens and having documented, and then some blessed models. And there's some models maybe you would not allow based on the risks that actually exist in those models. Then visibility of at any given time, could you actually see what kind of data transfers may be happening? And we will, as a step number 4, which is the central step, in how do you actually put the right guardrails around these models, such that data going into the model, data coming out of the model, you define those guardrails, and you've enabled your teams, respective development teams and respective users inside your organizations, that because you've put those rails, you feel comfortable not to shutting things down, but to be operating within those rails and feeling comfortable that you've enabled your organizations. Similarly, compliance. Once these things in place, you can do a bunch of checks on top to show that you're actually compliant with the most important regulations that are relevant to you, relevant to your industry, relevant to your company, and so forth. So let's step through these, the simple 5-step process. So how do you discover the AI models? Just like, the terms have been thrown around before, like shadow ITs. Think of this as like a shadow AI. In your prod environments, in your non-prod environments, what models are active? Let's say if you're operating in a public cloud, could you discover whether natively being provided by the public cloud provider or somebody using open source model and hosting it by themselves? What models are active? Could you have real-time inventory of those models? And that's a starting point for you to actually get a grasp, at least from your own developer ecosystem. Secondly, it is not simply about what models are active inside your own development environments, inside your own apps, inside your own infrastructure. But because your data also sits in third-party apps and SaaS apps, and just like yourself, those companies are also trying to bring value using AI. But what data is going, your data is going to AI, and what do you know around the use of the data by the SaaS providers, and how do you document it and at any given time? What risk assessments do you actually do to understand that? And having a one place to, if you were to be complying with a bunch of different regulations on the use of data and AI, this overall catalog of AI models directly in your environments or indirectly with third parties that you work with, that has to be there. That's just a starting point, because that will drive things that you're going to allow, that you're not going to allow, where you need extensive controls, where you need maybe some kind of a contract updates that you would need to be doing. Maybe you need to get some kind of indemnifications. All that is going to be driven by step number one. Then, if you were to be talking about like what risks and how do you assess those risks, it has to be some standard way. And this goes into just even understanding at the model level, whether these models are toxic, whether they are legit, whether they are blessed is the right, especially if these things are coming from the open source. Do you know exactly what's the source of these models, and do you know exactly that whether it has hallucination and bias and any kind of poisoning that may have happened because it's not the right version of the models, and other considerations of copyrights and things like that. Some, of course, is going to be a lot of testing is happening around these models, so it will be there. And some you would need to do yourself based on your own use case, as well as the systems that you're stitching together around these models, but testing the systems, because not just the model itself in your enterprise use case is going to be what data is you are providing to the model, whether for generation purpose or whether for tuning or training purposes. So how do you classify this risk and have those risks be available at any given time around the model is going to be important. The third important thing is that visibility and documentation and mapping of AI models are connected to what data systems, directly or indirectly, right? And having that map available, that this AI model actually, a bunch of these data systems actually feed into this AI model, whether for training or generation or inference purposes. What kind of processing is going on? Maybe certain kind of processing is okay, but other kind is not. So layering that on top of it, so those flows are important. Similarly, on the SaaS vendors, knowing what models they use is great, but what kind of data goes in and onto those SaaS services, and out of that data, how much sensitive data may or may not be going to third-party model providers, where their SaaS vendors may be actually sending this data. And then again, based on your own risk assessment, there are certain risks that have to be coming out, and maybe they're okay with respect to your compliance obligations. Maybe they're not okay with respect to compliance obligation. The corrective actions, which we're going to talk about, would need to be taken. So I think up to step number 3 is various levels of visibility, which is needed before you can take action, where you can put some rails around it, so that you know that you have a safe use of data and AI going on. But what are the typical issues? Before we talk about the controls, let's talk about the issues. Even the OWASP actually has defined a very initial list of top 10 considerations for LLMs. And these goes into prompt injection attacks. What is a prompt injection attack? Is essentially manipulating a chatbot, or manipulating an interface through which you can have natural language or any other kind of exchange of information, and trying to bypass and then having him do things which are not desirable to do. And it's already happening, because there are certain controls. You ask certain things in a certain way, you can actually bypass the front door and go from the side door, kind of a thing. How is the output handled? Insecure, if it's insecure, it's a problem. Training data poisoning. where you could actually inject in the path of the training certain data that can either poison the model or start giving some kind of a bad information, or itself, the data could be malicious itself that can create problems. That actually creates issues in terms of what data it will start sharing on the other side. Then classic denial of service and no question exfiltration of data. And in the exfiltration of data or data leakage, it also goes towards reconstructing based on asking a set of questions, reconstructing what data used for training purposes. And if the training data was sensitive and if it goes out through that path, that's also not good. And then no question permissions issues and entitlement issues, these are the kind of things that are literally baseline. That's what they are among the top 10 list of OWASP that need to be accounted for before you can actually put control. These are the kind of issues you'll be handling. Similarly, is worth looking at NIST, Trustworthy and Responsible AI, which also talks about overlapping things, but a lot of research on poisoning attacks and privacy attacks and evasion attacks, and similarly trainer data controls, bypassing of the model controls, and the query access controls, bypassing of some of that. These are all the things require that on both sides of the model that you actually have controls. Let's talk about those a bit. This is the ingestion of data, whether this ingestion is happening for tuning or training purposes of the model, or it's actually happening for the inference or generation of the model. It's if you actually have policies around it, what data can be used, and if you can define and put the rails in which the data is inspected, data is understood, what's going into it, these models, and those data policies are enforced in terms of cleaning the data, redacting the data, anonymizing the data, and things like that. So before actually it goes into these models or vector databases and so forth, that you actually have you feel good that your desired only your desired data is going in. And of course, at this stage, you could also do other inspections in where any attempts on the training data poisoning can also be detected and prevented from actually happening. On the right side of the model, where the output is actually coming out, and you have a prompt sitting in front, and now it's trying to interact with these generative AI systems, things like prompt injection attacks and all these things that are listed here, they need to be protected. And how do you do that is you would need to actually inspect. You would need to understand that what is being asked from these systems, was it a legit ask, or was it an attempt to bypass? And similarly, what the responses are coming out, you would want to inspect to actually understand whether those responses adhere to your governance, your security, your privacy wish list of things, which means this inspection has to not only provide visibility, but also provide prevention and blocking capabilities where and these systems would need to understand the natural language because a lot of these attacks would happen as if you're conversing with the generative AI systems. And the policy definition across it actually also is going to be actually important, right? And the fifth thing is once if you have visibility, and if you have visibility of models, visibility of risks, and understanding of your how the data is flowing, and if you have controls in terms of what data is going into it and what's coming out of it, these are literally many of the checks and requirements that these compliance, variety of these compliance and standards actually have. So if you put the step 1 to 4 in place appropriately, most likely, many of these attributes that are needed on the compliance side will be there, right? And there are no question there are other things in these requirements which are very much tied to privacy of data, the rights of the individuals of data is being used, the consent, whether you have the consent to use this data, whether you have done the appropriate data mapping exercises for it. There are other things which are more, I would say, baseline things that you try to do, but for every generative AI system, the step 1 to 4 is fundamentally which is certainly needed, which is I won't repeat it here, but these are literally highlighted, and you'll get these slides, which you can see through, which are literally similar things I highlighted here. For reference, I will also be providing, this is actually, I've added it here, we can actually reference, this is Gartner's reference, the source is Gartner, which they call AI TRiSM, which is the AI trust, risk, and security management technology components. And what we discussed was pretty much, there were a variety of important aspects of the overall TRiSM as the Gartner defines it, which has model management, data protection, understanding of the AI systems, organization governance, workflows, policies. Bunch of these things actually what you saw in which were more tied to Data+AI. And of course, there are more things in terms of application security here, anomaly detection, and those are certainly in addition to what we talked about in the previous slides. Similarly, this is, as a reference I've added here, is coming from the NIST, which is very recent, which is adversarial machine learning. They talk about, what is NIST trustworthy and responsible AI, and there's a whole series coming out of NIST, which is actually quite useful. In general, I'll say that more and more, having this concept of one place where you have full understanding of your data and you have full understanding of the regulations that are actually tied to it and the flow of information, and in fact, implementing what's called a data command center will be more and more needed, because AI is fueled by data. Without data, there is just no generative AI, whether it's training or inference or generative purposes. So, and if you really want to enable your organizations, these rails are needed, and a data command center could be quite helpful in there. And this is another resource which could be very useful. If you can go to aigovernance.center, it has a lot of white papers. It has a lot of blogs, and also regulatory information. This could be a resource for you, which you can go check it out, which is aigovernance.center. I really appreciate you taking time. And if you need to reach out, feel free to drop me a line, which is rjalil@security.ai, and would be happy to provide any answers. Thank you so much.